Hey guys, Dimension Master Studios here, how y'all doing? So in case you guys don't know, when it comes to the next era of Ninjago, the episodes will actually be going back to the 22-minute format. That's right, the 11-minute format is coming to an end. And to be completely honest with you guys, I'm actually kind of upset about this. Mainly because I feel like with the 11-minute format, we got a lot of really great episodes when it came to Ninjago. So for today's video, I decided that I wanted to go over my personal favorite Wildbrain episodes. This is obviously just my own opinion, yours can be different, and that is totally fine. Feel free to leave your personal opinions down below, and let's get into this whole thing. Number 10, Long Live the King. I think that Seabound gave us a lot of really good episodes, and honestly, out of all the ones that we got, this one is actually my favorite, and it's for a lot of different reasons. For starters, the animation. I think that Seabound was a really well animated season, especially when it came to the water effects, and during this episode, it is no exception. I also really liked the fight scenes that we got during this episode, even though there weren't that many of them, they were still really good. But my favorite part about this episode is Trimar's death and how this affects Calamar and Benthelmar. For Calamar, this pushes him over the edge and it causes him to become a full-blown villain, with him fully being set on trying to reawaken Wajira and invade Ninjago. Meanwhile, when it comes to Benthelmar, this pushes him to help the ninja and aid them in their escape from Merlopia, and this ends up leading to him and Calamar fighting against each other multiple times over the course of the season. And honestly, I do think Trimar's death was handled really well, mainly because of, again, how it affects Calamar and Benthelmar. And overall, I really like this episode. Number 9, Fall of the Monastery. Overall, I didn't like Crystallized. I thought it was a pretty bad season, but honestly, I did really like this episode. And this was honestly my favorite episode that we got during Crystallized. This episode basically being a massive battle between the good guys and the Council of the Crystal King over the golden weapons. I think that's honestly a really interesting idea for an episode, and overall, I genuinely really liked what we got. Just like in the previous episode, I think the animation during this episode was absolutely amazing. Seriously, this fight scene looks so good. I also really like the character interactions during this episode, mainly when it comes to the council. They are absolutely hilarious. Plus, at the same time, the fight in general is honestly really cool to see. With the council and the heroes clashing against each other over the golden weapons, with the heroes trying to protect the golden weapons, meanwhile the council is trying to steal the golden weapons, it's honestly something really cool to see. And overall, when it comes to this episode, even though it is mainly just a massive fight between the good guys and the council, honestly, I did really enjoy seeing that, and overall, again, I really like this episode. Number 8, Stop, Drop, and Side Scroll. With Prime Empire being a video game focused season, it only makes sense to have an episode be based on classic video games, and honestly, I really like the stuff we got during this episode. For starters, once again, the animation is really good, and in case it isn't obvious, I love Wildbrain's animation style. I think their animation style is absolutely amazing when it comes to the show. But that's not it. I also really like the different video game levels the ninja end up going through. They end up going through a side-scroller level, an endless climber, and eventually a classic fighting game. That's honestly something really cool. I also like how this episode decided to bring back Air Jitsu. It was so cool seeing Air Jitsu in the show again, considering it hasn't been in the show ever since 2017 with Hands of Time, so that was really cool. But the big thing when it comes to this episode is Lloyd versus Avatar Harumi. I really like this fight scene when it comes to the show. For starters, once again, the animation is absolutely amazing, but I also really like what this fight means for Lloyd. Starting in Season 11, Lloyd started to go through this character arc revolving around him getting over Harumi and moving on from her, and during this fight scene, we actually see the continuation of that storyline. And honestly, I do really like that. And overall, when it comes to this episode, I really enjoyed it a lot. Number 7, The Upley Strike Back. This was the penultimate episode to Master of the Mountain, and overall, I really liked this episode. For starters, just like the rest of Master of the Mountain, I think this episode is really, really funny. I think season 13 is the funniest season in the show. And once again, this episode is no exception. I especially really like the moment when Cole is talking about the Skull Sorcerer's villain monologue. That was funny. I also really like the massive fight scene that we end up getting between the ninja and their allies and going up against the Awakened Warriors. The fight scene is honestly really good, and I especially really like the massive scale of the fight scene, seeing everything that's going on. That was definitely really cool. But the big thing when it comes to this episode is Cole versus the Skull Sorcerer. We end up getting this fight scene both during this episode and during the next episode, The Son of Lily, and overall, I really like this fight scene. The animation and fight choreography looks absolutely amazing during the fight scene, and I especially really like what this ends up meaning for Cole's character, although that really comes more into play during the next episode, which I'll be getting back to later on. Number 6, Never Trust a Human. This was Ninjago's first ever flashback episode, and honestly, I really like this episode. For starters, I like how this episode's title is meant to be a callback to the season 1 episode Never Trust a Snake. That's pretty cool, but that's not all. I also really like the story for this episode, seeing Sensei Wu and Asphyra slowly become friends over time, only for there to be the big reveal that Asphyra was actually evil the whole time, and she was just using Sensei Wu so that way she could learn Spinjitzu. I think that's honestly something pretty interesting. Plus, I also really like how this episode gives us more information about Forbidden Spinjitzu. We learn that the first Spinjitzu master was the one who created Forbidden Spinjitzu in the first place, and we also learn how it works. Learning that when it comes to Forbidden Spinjitzu, it makes the user stronger, but it slowly corrupts them over time. I think that's a pretty interesting concept, all things considered. I also really liked the fight scene between Wu, Garmadon, and Asphyra. I thought it was pretty cool. Plus, I also really liked the ending of the episode, considering it sets up what we saw with Asphyra earlier on during the season, and it sets up stuff that will end up happening with Sensei Wu later on during the season. So when it comes to this episode, like I said, this was Ninjago's first flashback episode, and honestly, I thought it was pretty good. Number 5, Secret of the Wolf. Now, this episode is definitely a very big deal when it comes to the Ice chapter. The episode starts off showing us just how evil Vex can be, considering he lies to the Ice Emperor saying Grimfax and his forces failed at their mission when they didn't, causing Grimfax to be tortured by the Ice Emperor, all for Vex's amusement, once again showing how evil he is. Also during this episode, Boreal is set up, which is pretty cool. We see a massive fight go on between the Titan mech and a giant rock monster, which is awesome. But the big thing when it comes to this episode is Lloyd and Akita. This was the episode where we finally saw Akita in her human form, and it changed everything. It changed her and Lloyd's dynamic with each other, and honestly, I really liked what we saw during this episode, showing how the two of them are affected by their trust issues, and this would end up leading into their dynamic for the remainder of the season, showing the two of them overcoming their trust issues and growing closer as a result. I think that's honestly pretty cool. Plus, this episode also starts recreating certain scenes from Season 8, but doing things slightly differently, and I really like these scenes because they end up showing interesting parallels between Lloyd and Akita, showing how similar the two of them are to each other. Again, I really like this, and overall when it comes to Secret of the Wolf, I really like this episode, especially considering what it ends up doing to Lloyd and Akita's storyline. Number 4, Game Over. This is the Prime Empire finale, and honestly, I really like this episode. For starters, once again with Prime Empire being a video game focused season, it only makes sense for the final episode to be called Game Over. But that's not all. When it comes to the season, it was building up this idea of stuff from Prime Empire entering the real world, and honestly, I really liked what we saw during this episode. Seeing Unagami, the Red Visors, the Rats, Okino, and so much more entering the real world, I thought it was honestly something pretty cool to see. Also, speaking of cool things to see, the massive fight scene between Jay and Unagami was so amazing to see, with their dragons fighting against each other during the episode. Seriously, that fight scene was amazing. But one thing that I really like about this episode is Unagami's defeat. Unagami isn't defeated in a massive battle, but instead it's him, Milton Dyer, and Jay all talking to each other. Honestly, I really like that idea, especially considering during this conversation, Unagami finally gets the answers that he's been searching for all this time. I think that's honestly really cool. Plus, at the same time, Milton Dyer realizes that he was wrong about programs and artificial intelligence, realizing that AI programs do have the ability to feel things. So honestly, I did really like that. I also really liked how at the end of the episode, Unagami decided to release everyone from Prime Empire, but also give the NPCs the choice to travel to the real world. That was honestly really nice of him. And overall, when it comes to this episode, honestly, I think it's a really great finale for Prime Empire. Number 3, The Son of Lily. This is the season finale for Master of the Mountain, and honestly, this is absolutely amazing. For starters, this episode continues on with the fight scene that we saw during the previous episode, continuing on the massive fight between Cole and the Skull Sorcerer, and I think that this is one of the best fight scenes in the show, both when it comes to the animation and fight choreography, like I said earlier, but also because of what this means for Cole's character. I feel like Master of the Mountain did a really great job when it came to handling Cole's character, and when it comes to this episode, especially during this fight scene, I feel like Cole's character is handled so well, especially during the moment where Cole unlocks the Spinjitzu Burst. A big thing for Cole's character during this season was him feeling insecure that he wouldn't be as good a warrior as his mom, but during this moment, Cole's able to overcome that, and he's able to unlock the Spinjitzu Burst and defeat the Skull Sorcerer once and for all. That was honestly really cool. Plus, there was also the big fight scene going on between the ninja and their allies versus the Awakened Warriors, like we also saw during the previous episode, and I really enjoyed it. Vanya's coronation was also something that was really nice to see, and I especially really liked the optimistic ending at the very end of the season, with the ninja going out on a new adventure. Honestly, when it comes to this episode, I really like it, and I think this is one of Ninjago's best finale episodes. Number 2, Awakenings. Out of every finale episode that we have gotten during the Wildbrain era of the show, this one is honestly my favorite, and it's for a lot of different reasons. For starters, I feel like all the major characters during this episode were all handled really well, especially Lloyd, Akita, Vex, and the Ice Emperor. All of them were amazing during this episode. I also feel like this episode was able to wrap up all the major storylines and character arcs during the season in a really well done way. There were a lot of storylines that were going on during the Ice chapter, mainly when it came to each of the characters, and like I said, I feel like this episode was honestly able to wrap up all of them in a really well done way. I also really like Vex's punishment during this episode, with him being banished by the end of the season. I feel like this makes perfect sense considering where Vex was before the Ice chapter started, with him being in exile because he believed everyone hated him, and now Vex is in exile because everyone does hate him. It's a coming full circle thing when it comes to his character, so I think that's pretty cool. And Lloyd and Akita during this episode were handled so well. I think that Lloyd and Akita had an amazing dynamic over the course of the season, and this episode is no exception. And I feel like this episode was able to perfectly show just how much these two have grown over the course of the season, and how close the two of them have become over the course of the Ice chapter. And honestly, I feel like Akita giving Lloyd a kiss on the cheek at the very end of the episode was the best way that their Ice chapter storyline could have come to an end. And I especially really like the optimistic ending right at the very end, with Akita talking about seeing Lloyd again, and the line, "never is a very long time." And honestly, I'm still remaining optimistic about this, and I really hope that we see Akita again at some point. Number 1, Last of the Formlings. We have gotten so many amazing Wildbrain episodes, but for me personally, nothing's going to be able to beat this episode. I feel like this episode is able to get so much done in 11 minutes, and I feel like all of it is handled so well. For starters, I definitely think that the 2D animation was the best idea to go with for this episode. It helps make this episode feel really unique compared to a lot of the other flashback episodes that we've gotten when it comes to Ninjago. I also really like the music during this episode. The music is absolutely amazing, especially when Akita finds her animal form. Seriously, that soundtrack is absolutely amazing. I also really like the backstory this episode ends up giving us for Akita, but also Vex. I think this episode does a really great job at handling Vex's character by revealing some stuff about his past, mainly the fact that he was from the Formling village, giving him a connection to Akita. I think that is honestly something pretty cool. And for the stuff that we get with Akita during the episode, I honestly really like it. It tells this nice little storyline of Akita initially having anxiety over her animal form, but after she finds her animal form, she doesn't have it anymore. I think that's honestly something pretty interesting, and it also creates an interesting parallel when it comes to Vex, which is pretty cool. I also really like what we see towards the end of the episode with the Formling village getting frozen because of what this ends up meaning for Akita's character, because this moment ends up explaining why Akita has been acting the way she did during the Ice chapter, which I think is also really cool. Plus, it also creates a really nice parallel when it comes to her and Lloyd, showing the two of them are both the way they are because of a very similar situation, with the two of them both thinking they lost everyone close to them at some point, which is honestly pretty interesting. However, my favorite thing about this episode would easily have to be the moments where the story is just told through the visuals and the music, and there is minimal to no dialogue. We mainly see this towards the beginning of the episode and towards the end, showing stuff with the Formlings, but the biggest moment is easily during the middle when Akita finds her animal form. And this is honestly one of my favorite moments in the show because I feel like everything works so well during this one moment. The animation, the music, what this moment means for Akita's character, and just everything about this moment is so good. And overall, when it comes to Last of the Formlings, I love this episode, and not only is this my favorite episode of Season 11, but it is also my favorite Wildbrain episode and one of my favorite episodes of Ninjago. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me, what are your guys' top 10 favorite Wildbrain episodes? Tell me down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys. This is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.